Ladies and gentlemen, questions and answer time. Questions from the floor. If you raise your hand, Mr. Trindhamer will come along. And if you feel free to express your name and or organization, you're welcome. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, let go.
Good evening. I presume you have been in our parliament today, a visit to the...
Not yet, tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow.
Yes. The Foreign Relations Committee.
Are you going to tell them the same what you did here, and especially ask them the questions if they really think that sanctions are the target of getting freedom in Iran and no nuclear weapons in Iran or whatever? Because I don't think so, but we participate in the sanctions with all the other European Union countries, and I think that it's only terribly bad for the people of Iran and not for the regime, because the regime they will have everything, no problem. I hope they will agree with some of you.
Okay. Sure, I mean, obviously there are many points in that nature, but on the issue of sanctions, let me suggest this. I always believe that there's a basic flaw in the thinking within the diplomatic cadre as to what strategy to implement vis-a-vis the Iranian regime. First of all, it behooves the question of those who are proponents of regime change as opposed to those who are proponents of behavior change. Guess what? The policy to adopt in either case is one and the same. And that's empowerment. Why? Because the element of leverage against the regime is supposedly something that will be more compelling for them to react to. And I think you have to understand what it is that the regime fears the most at the end of the day. True, I agree partly with your suggestion that I'm sure that people like Khamenei are not going to lose sleep at night thinking that there are sanctions imposed against Iran. Not that it doesn't hurt them, and I'm not suggesting for a second that sanctions has not have some impact. I'm simply suggesting that it's not enough, particularly if the only hope is to bring them back to the negotiation table. The only thing that makes them lose sleep at night is the fear that the people of Iran will one day rise against them. That's the true leverage. And oddly enough, it has been absent of any diplomatic effort against the regime, whether it is for behavior change or regime change. That's why it hasn't worked. That's why time and again, every attempt of negotiating with the regime has failed. Because you think you have a stick, but the regime calls your bluff, and they can circumvent a lot of these sanctions. And the people end up hurting more. Not that the Iranian people are not willing to tighten their belt, if they knew that it may end with the collapse of the regime. But it's not even stated as an aim. So as such, it doesn't have the ultimate outcome desired, either way. So this by itself requires a new way of thinking. I was saying earlier to the people I was having dinner with before coming to this table, that I think Einstein said it best. Einstein said that thinking that by doing more of the same, you would obtain a different result is a sign of insanity. And yet, the same kind of policy has been adopted for the past at least 15 years that I know of. Something has to change here. Maybe the status quo. The latest attempt was in Baghdad last week. Again, it failed. I personally think that there's a good reason why the regime cannot come to terms with the outside world. It's the fact that during the Cold War, one could argue that as diametrically opposed as the Soviet Union was to the free world, but there was a sphere of coexistence in a sphere of rationality where you could even have détente or some kind of a quid pro quo understanding. With this regime, we can't. Because every value that is cherished in the Western world is poison to them. Human rights, equality, non-discrimination, women's rights is something that this regime is inherently against. They cannot coexist. It's either them or us. That's how they look at it. And if they concede on the first point, they know that they have to go all the way after that. We should not be surprised why the expectation that you have from a rational way of thinking is not necessarily thought the same way for a regime that on top of it is paranoid. And one of the reasons they've been trying to buy time is to get to that point where under a nuclear deterrence they can impose a regional hegemony while maintaining a low level of tension, not to be overtaken by the superiority of conventional Western forces if there's an escalation of conflict. There's nothing you can do about it. They can continue supporting radical networks, Hezbollah, Hamas, everywhere on the planet, and pretty much impose themselves as a fait accompli. That's the whole reason. Not necessarily to go and wipe Israel off the map, although the Israelis have a right to say we're not going to take that chance. Bottom line is, if we want to find a true solution, if we want to avoid military conflict, if we want to avoid an extension of the cause, something has to change in the policies of various governments as they look to the Iranian dilemma. And by the way, a democratic Iran will be committed to bring an end to this proliferation. Because the problem is not the technology. The problem is the finger on the trigger. So asking this regime to change its nature is a waste of time. Bring real change is the ultimate solution and the only win-win approach. So my message to decision makers, whether the legislator or the executive of various governments, and of course public opinion, is to understand that the quickest way to obtain a solution is to think seriously about this prospect of empowerment. Because if you look at all the changes that happen in so many countries to bring an end to dictatorial regimes, has been a proactive support of the democratic forces in a non-violent civil disobedience campaign. From Lech Walesa to Václav Havel to Yushchenko to Mandela and the ANC and so many other examples in between, we see that a lot of these movements have succeeded in bringing an end to totalitarian or dictatorial regimes with a democratic outcome while being non-violent, but none of these have ever succeeded without tacit international support. I repeat, they have not succeeded without tacit international support. The question is that a better avenue or the cost of war and the consequences of it? Because that's the real choice. The question is not whether change will happen. It will. It's a fact of history. The question is at what cost? And as an Iranian, all I'm trying to do is to bring change with the least possible cost to our society and with a greater chance of success and for a democratic outcome. Because seldom have I seen violent scenarios of change ending with a democratic outcome. That's what it's all about. So we can argue about the merits of and the extent of sanctions, if you will, to answer your question. But we cannot only think of that. We have to think bigger than this. And that has been absent in many of the debates, or at least it hasn't been as vivid. And that's what I'm trying to do here, to add more to this so we can have a breakthrough and changing the status quo at the same time.